Who doesn't fancy business traveling? Fancy planes, fancy cars, fancy hotels. Sure. So when you're working with software products, it's not that uncommon that every now and then you are going to have to do a business trip. A business trip can be many things. It can be a visit to a customer, it can be visiting an event, it can be being a representative in that event, or just going there as an attendee. But no matter what the reason for your business trip is, I would like to give you a little guide to help you to be ready for that trip and be prepared for all the things that you are going to have to take into consideration. So let's start with the most obvious one. The reason for your business trip. You're going on a trip because you are visiting a customer, because you are visiting an event, and maybe you had to do some presentations. Be prepared for what you had to present. Prepare all the documentation, potential slides that you had to do, and rehearse them together maybe with somebody in your company, so you make sure that the message that you are giving is clear and understandable, and potentially also on brand with whatever brand guidelines you have in your company. If you had to do a training, it's a similar thing. Make sure that you have all the materials ready and that you ideally have tested it with somebody. At some point, you're also going to have to test it the first time with customers. Different story, but it would be good that you have some kind of review with somebody internally in the company. Especially when you are going to a meeting with customer, if you're going to discuss with customers, you had to have goals for that visit. You had to define what you want to achieve of that visit, what the potential actions are, prepare like meeting notes and so on, and that you describe all the goals that you want to achieve. Maybe the goals are not very specific goals, but maybe you need answers to certain questions that you have or agreed topics that you had to get to an agreement with your customer. Make sure that those ones are marked and that you achieve them. It's very easy, and I've seen them many times in different visits with customers where people start talking about many different topics and get a little bit lost on the different conversations, and then in reality the goal of the visit is not achieved. So make sure that you list all the goals for your visit and make sure that you cover the topics and that you do what you can, at least what is in your hands, to solve those. So for example, if your business trip is around a business model that you want to present for your product, you have to make sure that you agree or that you have a good review of that business model and that you get the opinions of the people that you went to visit to understand better what is their position and if they agree with it or not. Now let's go a little bit through some of the more practical tips on how to plan your business trip. The first one is that make sure that you document everything about your trip. How you're going to get to the place that you go, is it what type of transportation, train, metro, flights, especially if it's a place where you had never been. If you're going to stay there, where is the hotel, how you're going to reach there from the place where your transport is to the hotel, how you're going to reach from the hotel to the venue that you had to go, whether it's a customer or the event location. And also take into account that when you go to a different country, taxis might work in very different ways. Try to investigate how they work. In some places, maybe you want to make sure that you go to the official taxi lane in an airport and that you don't end up with some illegal taxi driver taking you around the city. Especially if you are going to a new place where you had never been before, I would recommend to try to find a hotel that is relatively close to the customer you are visiting or the venue that you are going to for an event. It makes transportation much easier, especially if you are going to be several days. The other option is, of course, that you stay as close as possible to the airport. Typically, I would rather stay closer to the customer, but of course, it will depend a lot on what kind of neighborhood is that. Is there anything to do? Typically, there's not going to be much to do either where your customer has the offices, neither where the airport is, unless your customer is downtown, which in some cases it might be, and then you're lucky and then you have things to do. In most of the cases, your customer is going to be somewhere in the outskirts of a city or a small town, and there's really going to be little to nothing to do. In some cases, your customer or the people that you're visiting might go out with you in the evening, and then you solve a little bit the where I'm going to be eating tonight. But in other cases, it's good to do a research and understand where are the places where I could be going to eat when I'm going to be staying in this hotel. And again, write it down in a document so you can search them later on. And you don't have to try to rely on shaky Wi-Fi in the hotel. Then find something to do in the evenings. Usually you are going to be working quite long days when you are having a business trip. Usually you're going to be probably among the last ones leaving the offices. And if you're in an event, it's going to be probably quite similar. Days tend to be pretty long. Try to find something maybe to do when you finish the day. It's good to get some air. It's good to move. It's good to do potentially some exercise. Yes, people love to go out for drinks. Usually you don't rest much and then you're very tired the next day, especially if you're going to do it several days. It's up to you, obviously. I'm not here to tell you what you should do. For me, it works better to get fresh air, to move, to do exercise, go to rest relatively early, be fresh the next day. And finally, have a checklist for all the things that you need for your trip so you are not going to forget them. I'll share it with you in the description down below, the one that I have been using it. So I'm not going into the details right now, but what kind of water do you need to take? What kind of tech or personal tech do you need to take for your trip? So laptops, phones, passports, documentation, so on. All these things that you need for your trip so you don't forget anything when you are planning and organizing and you are getting ready to leave your home. Now let's go through some tips that are going to help you have a better experience when you are doing a business trip. First of all, have and use frequent traveler memberships. They are not as great as maybe they used to be in the past. They used to be better. That's my opinion at least. They are quite useful, especially if you are traveling relatively often and if you are traveling also for personal reasons. You usually can use the same one for both business and personal uses. It is really good if you are traveling often that you gather those points or those miles or whatever they call them, that they are going to help you to, for example, in the future, get discounts on flights or maybe on hotels or other stuff that they might have been offering. Second, maybe obvious, especially if you have been traveling, but if you don't travel very often, have the correct size of backpack or suitcase, especially if you are carrying a carry-on in a flight. This is important because it's not going to fit or it's going to be difficult to fit in many planes. And second, because you don't want to overpack. If you are going to for a couple of days out, typically with a carry-on, you are well set and usually you don't need much more. If you are going to go over 4 days, then is when you start to think that, well, do you need a suitcase that you actually had to check in and put in the cargo space of the plane? That starts to be borderline. Some people will go with a carry-on for over a week and they're completely fine. But if you're thinking of putting things like for exercising, trainers, and so on, then that starts to take more space because shoes take a lot of space. And then maybe you need a bigger suitcase. The next one, especially if you're going to go to a different country, you should learn a little bit about that country that you're going. And I'm not saying that you should read this history, but understand a little bit how it works. Do they use cash? Do they use credit cards? How often are those? Do they have a culture for tipping? Is my phone going to work in that country or do I need something special? This will help you have a better experience when you are in the place where you are visiting and not get too lost. Especially if you are going to a place where you don't speak the language, having a document even in a phone, Notion that you can show is like address, hotel address. They can read it. They can understand where you're going. If you try to pronounce it, it might be that they don't understand it because most likely you're not pronouncing it correctly. And then you are going to have maybe not a very pleasant situation to try to figure out how to explain where you want to go. Next, make sure that you have a travel insurance first and that you understand what the travel insurance covers. If you're visiting a place that you know, where you know people, also remember to plan those visits and plan to talk with the people that you want to visit and that you want to talk. Ex-colleagues, colleagues from the company, friends, family, so on. Make sure that you appoint some time with them. You visit them. I did it with my brother in the last business trip that I did. It was awesome. We didn't do anything crazy, anything great. We just spent like 4 hours talking together over dinner. Have a great time. Nothing super exciting. Probably the best part of my trip. Another one is that if you have Not a very good traveling backpack or suitcase situation. It's not a bad idea to invest in a good travel bag or suitcase. They last usually longer, they're prepared better for carrying all the stuff that you need for the trip. If you use your sports backpack, its sometimes can be a little bit difficult to handle. Not obviously necessarily not a must, but if you can afford it, it might make the traveling experience ever so slightly better. Sometimes also pays off to have an extra change of clothes in your carry-on, especially if you are traveling with a big suitcase that you had to check in the plane and you don't have it available for you right away, that you had to go and pick it up. It's good to have that extra clothes in your carry-on, in your backpack or in your small suitcase, because every now and then things are not going to go right in your trips. Some of the things that has happened to me in the past is sleeping in Chicago airport when the flight was delayed and all the hotels were booked. Another time I had to change flights, I had to go through customs. That took longer than expected, had to be moved to the next flight and maybe spend like 5 hours extra in the airport. Another time ended up running to the wrong terminal in London because somebody told me that the flight was in that place. It was my boss, so I cannot blame him for that one. End up in the wrong terminal, just get there. They told me that this is the wrong terminal, had to run to the other terminal, and when I got to the other terminal, the flight was gone. Last time I visited my hometown, my suitcase was lost for 4 days. And another time I had to visit a customer one day in Houston, another day I was flying to Kansas. Quite obviously, my suitcase was lost, didn't get in Houston. I had to travel the next day to Kansas. Luckily, when I went back to the airport, I already agreed with the personnel in the airport that I was going to fly over to Kansas and I will come and pick it up. Things can happen. Things will not go the way that you expect. So it's not a bad idea to pack a little bit extra on your suitcase in case of these things happening. As I say, I created a Notion template that I use myself for tracking my trips, for tracking all the things that I need to pack for the trip, what is going to be the goals of my visit, where am I going, what is the hotel that I'm staying, what are the flights that I'm taking. I'm going to share it with you. You can just go to the link down below, go get it, download it, use it yourself. It's free, so just go and use it. And by the way, the only thing I ask you is just to give feedback and tell me maybe what are the things that you would be missing in such a template. If you like the video, please give it a like and subscribe to the channel. I will see you in the next one, and remember, stay safe.